you don't necessarily need to come and do something that's night and day different to what anyone else has done. You just have to do it more consistently and better, what you actually believe about money, right? If you believe it's hard to make, then it will be.
Yeah.
If you believe that you're never going to have much of it, then you won't. If you believe that every time you get it, it's all this shit turns up and you got all these bills and all these unexpected things, and that's exactly what's going to happen. I basically tied my whole identity around being a basketballer. And so when it got taken away from me, I had no idea what was next, and then went to the gym, hated it, and then quickly fell in love with it. And that became this thing that not only like allowed me to change my physique, but it changed me as a person.
Today we've got the man behind DJK Fitness, Danny Kennedy. Welcome to the dos&d show, mate.
Yes, Danny.
Boys, thanks for having me.
Mate, talk to us about your morning. You were just saying off air, you recorded a little bit of wisdom for us all that would probably have already been out by now. But talk to us a little bit about those little sparks of, what's the word? Wisdom? That's the wrong word. Inspiration. That's the word.
Well, shit, the episode would want to be good now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I won't tell you which one it was, just in case it was shit. So my life at the moment is, and this has been a common theme basically ever since I got into, or since I've left school really, is a bit of a mixture of a few different pillars. And so, I mean, at the moment, it's a lot of it is coaching and mentoring still, like from a fitness and mindset perspective. But, obviously we've got our supplement company too. But in terms of content, the way that I've always, approached it is very much so almost a document, not create process, which is kind of ironic considering at the moment we're kind of creating content. And obviously a lot of my podcasting is created. But what I mean by that is obviously whether it's conversations with clients or, people like yourselves or just anyone, there'll usually be something that I kind of grab onto that is either valuable for that person or something that I just think would be valuable for other people to hear. And that's kind of how I've approached the podcast ever since I started it. So what you're referring to this morning it happens quite often. I'll be having a conversation with a client or something and then just think, shit, this would be something that a lot of people would benefit from. And so I'll just record a quick solo episode at home, whether it's with my, proper setup or just using some handheld mics or whatever, and put those episodes out. And I think not only does that end up being quite valuable, obviously for the audience, but for me, it allows me to keep it quite, I don't know if this is a great word, but enjoyable and like playful with the podcast and not too serious. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Obviously with guest episodes and stuff like this, having like good production is great and really valuable. But at the same time, when I started the podcast, there really wasn't any podcasts in Australia really, let alone in the health and fitness space. And so my first 200 episodes were, recorded fucking all over the place, in cars, in under bloody bed sheets, in cupboards and all the rest of it, just for good sound quality. But the main purpose was always like providing value on the episode itself, regardless of how well produced it was or who it was with or how good the camera angles were. It was always about just trying to add value and quickly, like that episode we just mentioned, like within 5 minutes of recording it was on Spotify.
Oh, really?
Right.
So that is another common theme for myself. Like, I don't know if it's good or bad, but kind of speed of implementation on everything really. And, there's obviously certain aspects where, it takes a little longer and you want to curate it a bit more. But that's what I like about it. It's just have an idea, record it, put it out to the audience. And, by the end of the day, hopefully people have already listened to it.
Yeah.
So for those who might not know your story and who you are, but so you're obviously an online coach, fitness coach, and I feel like you got into that kind of a bit ahead of the game as well. Like, look, from a content perspective, especially in the podcast realm too, like it seems as though 2025, it's a lot harder to break in as that specialist, in particular in fitness. But you obviously, you now have the add-on of the mindset approach now too, and mindfulness, and probably more of an overarching kind of wellness kind of coaching. I mean, did you feel like, looking back now, you got in at the right time with the current market?
Yes, for a couple of reasons. One, obviously it wasn't as saturated, which is always great. And I'd been doing YouTube flat out like up until that point as well. And just, I'd been doing it consistently for a fairly long time and there wasn't a great deal of reward for the effort going in. Like, not that that's why I was doing it, but, the amount of work that went into making those vlogs every single day and uploading daily, in return for how many people were viewing him, it was just like, it's a bit of a fucking waste of time in a sense.
Yeah.
And so that's why I started the pod. But I guess the other benefit of starting it then in comparison to people starting it now is that there was no expectation of like instant gratification.
Yeah.
It was like, one, barely anyone even knew about podcasts, and two, I was shit at podcasting, and no one, as I said, no one really knew what they were. And so there was never an expectation for it to just blow up overnight. And I think that's one of the things that people probably struggle with now, or one of the reasons why you don't see as many successful podcasts long-term or anything really, business or social media, is because there's this almost like an entitlement of an expectation of it going to happen really quickly. And if it doesn't, then people think there's something wrong, or that it's not going to work, or that their show's just no good. But I've said a number of times on the show, I've done 500, just over 560 episodes now. And it took 3 years, similar to yourselves, like 3 years really, to the point where it was like even worth my time.
Yeah.
But I just continued to put out an episode every single week. And I went into it with a bit of a game plan, I guess you could say, of just being very consistent with the content and just obviously trying to improve my skill set and the guests and the value of the guests over time. And I just knew that inevitably when the time came and people started to find it, that it'd just be too good not to listen to in a sense. And that's not trying to sound cocky. It wasn't more so about me. It was more so about the value that other guests were coming on the show and providing, that when people found it, there was just a pot of gold, right? And so you don't get that if you just start chopping and changing or pivoting based off how many downloads you've got. And so, as I said, it took years to the point where it was like barely any downloads. And then it finally kind of started to go over the hump, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. But even still, since that point, which was vastly better than when it started, it's still just been really slow and steady growth. So I think that is a benefit, because as I said, I think now, because there's so much and it is competitive. Yeah. But even still, I think your approach shouldn't have anything to do with however many podcasts there are or who else is doing it. And I think at the same time, you don't necessarily need to come and do something that's night and day different to what anyone else has done. You just have to do it more consistently and better.
Yeah.
And in your own way, and not trying to replicate or see what other shows are doing well and try and do the same type of thing. It's just find your own lane, be really consistent with it, and just improve. And the results will eventually come.
We ask ourselves quite often, like, would we start today? Like, if we had nothing, would we start what we're trying to do today? And sometimes we actually say, we don't know if we would. Like, it's interesting, but it's interesting what you say too about slow and steady, because I think slow and steady typically in this game actually equals longevity rather than a flash out of the pan and, you come off reality TV or out of a sporting career and you've got a bit of a following, and you might be able to start with a big bang with a couple big guests and you skyrocket and you think you get brands on board, but it's just like, it's not typically sustainable, especially if you're not in it for the right reasons.
That's exactly right. I think that's the point.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you actually doing it for?
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you guys are the same, but for me, it wasn't quite clearly. I wanted people to listen and be great to monetize it and all this stuff, but that was never the purpose. Yeah. It was to build brand awareness, obviously, for my other businesses, and to just build trust with my audience. Yeah. Or the people who are following the show, which takes time. The intent was always for it to take a long time in a sense.
Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about, and the audience, and because I don't like it when we talk about this on our own show, about how difficult podcasting is, because everybody, sometimes when you tell people what you do, people look at you and they think it's easy, and a lot of people start and don't last very long. Yeah. It's a lot of arms to doing, like, the monetization's one side, but even the consistency of putting out episodes, quality guests, quality content. Take us behind the scenes and how difficult it actually is when you peel back the smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, it is a good question. I think there's just so many different aspects to it that kind of get overlooked in a sense, right? And it also depends on how much effort just like anything else, how much effort you want to put in and what your expectation of what you're going to see in return is. And so from the monetizing perspective, like, obviously you've been fortunate to have brand deals and stuff with the podcast, but even to this day, like right now, I don't have any sponsors on the show. And so if anything, it costs me a fair bit, particularly for guest episodes and, working with the team and stuff. Like, it costs me money, but indirectly it's led to so much business. And as I mentioned before, it's led to a lot of trust with the audience.
Yeah.
That makes it very much worth it. But I think the biggest thing is this skill set of it. You know, it kind of looks pretty fucking easy, right?
Yeah.
Just sit down and have a chat with your mates or meet someone cool and have a conversation with them. But it looks like that from the outside. But as you guys would understand, it doesn't necessarily feel like that when you're on the other side of the conversation thinking about the fact that it's going to go out to people, or you want the clips to look good, or you want to not impress the guest, but get the respect of the guest for being a good interviewer and doing your research and all this type of stuff. And so, you know, I look back at the episodes. Well, I don't actually look back at them. I've never listened to any episode that I've done, to be honest, aside from a couple that I just really enjoyed the guests. But if you went back to some of my old episodes, like let's say from 300 or less, dog shit.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
real bad. And even to this day, when people, you know, give a compliment of like, you know, I don't want to sound like a flog, but like when people say, oh, like you're good at this, or like, how do you go and just show up and do these interviews and not get nervous or speak well or whatever? And I'm under no illusion that I have still so much growth as an interviewer or as a host to go, but it wasn't like this at the start, you know, and the only reason that it is like this now is because of the amount of reps that I've done of recording. And so there is a lot that goes into it. As you said, you know, if you're getting guests on the show, there's a lot to coordinate with guests, particularly if it's in person or even online. The outreach, like I tell the story a lot on the podcast of how many guests that I've had on the show that I've been trying to get on for 5 years sometimes. Like there was one guest recently that took 6 years.
Wow.
And it was a follow-up message every 3 to 6 months for 6 years. But I knew that when I first reached out, there was no real entitlement of like, oh, they said no, or they left me on red, or didn't even see my message. It was just like, well, if I get better and the show gets more valuable, then it's going to get to a point where the likelihood of them saying yes is higher. And so that's on me. That I'm responsible for that. And so, yeah, you've got the skill set of actually interviewing, or even if you're just doing it by yourself, like that's a pretty, you know, not when do you ever just sit down in front of a camera and a microphone and try and have a conversation, even by yourself? Like never for most people. And so I think we almost take it for granted a little bit sometimes of like the difficulty of it or the awkwardness of it if you haven't done it before. So yeah, there's just many bits and pieces. And then of course it's trying to detach from judging whether or not your show or even your skill set is good based off how many downloads you've got.
Yes.
Particularly now, as you said, starting your show now, it's going to take time to break into a point where you're getting a good amount of people tuning in. But it doesn't mean your show's shit, or it doesn't mean that you're not any good, or it doesn't mean that you haven't got value to provide. It's just consistency. You know, as you said before, like, I don't know what the exact stat is. Maybe you guys know, but the percentage of people who make it past episode 7, I think it was, is like next to nothing.
It's crazy.
You're in the top 99% or something if you make it past episode 7.
The craziest stat I heard literally a week ago, I could not believe this. To be in the top 1% podcasters in the world, you only need 200 people listening a week. On average, 200.
Crazy.
And that gets you in the top 1%.
Crazy.
So there'd be a lot of people that would probably have, I mean this respectfully, like 30 to 50 listeners and go, fuck, like, why am I? But
you're not far off.
Yeah, you're not actually far off. Like, and we were at that stage once upon a time. Like, where there was like nobody, like literally nobody listening. And yeah, it's a crazy world. Yeah.
I think.
Sorry, you
I
go.
was just going to say, even for socials as well, like, or a podcast, let's say you've got 500 people listening, or like 500 total downloads for the month, which you might look at that and go, oh well, it's not as high as what I'd like it to be. But imagine standing in a room talking to 500 people.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a small amount of people.
That's right.
And depending on what you're trying to get out of the podcast or what purpose the podcast has. And so for mine, a lot of it was educational or whatever you want to refer to it as. And so the focus was always one person hearing the episode and taking something from it that might change their life or it might help them with whatever they're doing. And if it serves that purpose, then it's done its job.
Yeah.
And so it's also just like your perspective or how you kind of frame it to decide whether or not it's a success or whether it's growing or not. It can vary, because again, most people's expectation versus the reality of what it is so far skewed that you're kind of setting yourself up to be disappointed or setting yourself up to think that it's no good.
Yeah.
When the reality is, you're right where you need to be.
We'll get back to the episode with Danny Kennedy very shortly, but first, as always, a quick word from our good friends at Fleet Plan Hire Solutions. Guys, we talk about them every week, and that's for a very good reason. They are number one when it comes to all earth-moving needs. We're talking big jobs, small jobs, anything. This is your one-stop solution. Visit fbh.com.au now. Let's get back into the episode with Danny Kennedy. Yeah.
You sound like you're a person who has like high standards in like so many different areas of your life, and obviously there's so many different facets to your business. And I often talk to Dee about this, like the multi-hyphen method. And it's when you're doing so many different things, like you've obviously got the supplement company, you've got the podcast, you've got the coaching. Even though they all come under the same thing, there still is juggling different ways of communicating. There's different skill sets. How have you gone about trying to not do too much of one thing and not focus on the podcast too much? Because it just requires so much balance. Like I'm sure there's days when you kind of want to just podcast, but you'll have clients to adhere to, or team members that need attention. How do you go with that?
It's tricky. I'm probably under no illusion that if I was to go with one of those lanes and go all in, like it probably definitely would be more successful. But I think I've always kept in mind like why I'm doing it and like what the end goal or the outcome is. And for me, that is obviously to enjoy what I'm doing and to create like the life that I want to experience, right? And so for me to sit here and go, okay, well, if I just went all in on coaching and just didn't bother with the podcast and stop the supplements and stuff, like the business would grow and financially be better and all this type of stuff. But I enjoy this and I enjoy some of the other stuff too. And so I think in a sense, it's probably also part of the reason as to why it has been, in a sense, easy to remain so consistent and for me to stay in it for so long is to have those different lanes so that it's not all just one thing. I think back to even when I started PT, and you mentioned this before, like I started online coaching in 2015 and then podcasting in 2016. And if I hadn't have done the online side of things, I don't know how long I would have been a PT for.
Yeah.
Like I looked at that and just straight away just thought to myself, there's no way I want to be just doing this all day, every single day. Like as much as you love it, and I still do, but I back then loved it even more. I just thought to myself, as much as I love it, there's no way that you're not going to get burnt out and eventually just resent it in a sense. So yeah, there's a few different things I'm kind of doing at the moment, and they do all kind of tie in together to an extent, but this is probably the area that one of the areas I've struggled with the most is trying to do too much at once.
Yeah.
In a sense, because a lot of the things I'm doing now do require a lot of attention. We were talking before we hit record about the podcast. Like last year, that wasn't a priority. Like I still showed up and did it every week, but outside of that, it wasn't a focus point. And the results, in a sense, reflected it a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I think to do anything exceptionally well or beyond average, there is no balance.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes a conversation of, well, being selective with when you push and pull. There'll be, even at the moment with these 3-4 different things I'm doing, there'll be weeks or months where one of them gets a lot more of the focus for a reason or with a purpose, and then the other ones take a little bit of a back seat. And then there'll be others where I'll go harder on some of these and these ones pull back. But I think it's fucking near impossible to do multiple things or a handful of things exceptionally well at the highest level altogether.
Yeah.
Because even podcasting, right? If you guys are showing up 7 days a week focusing on the podcast and I'm doing it once a week, it doesn't matter how good you are at podcasting or any of that shit. Like there's no doubt that you guys are going to see better growth than what I would. It's impossible not to, right? If you're putting in 7 days worth compared to my 1 day, again, it doesn't matter what your experience level is or any of that stuff. I just think you have to, I feel like I'm rambling a bit, but similar to what you said before, it's also looking at your expectation versus the reality of like how much you're putting in.
Yeah, and I think it's so true because I think a lot of times people do sugarcoat to make themselves feel better and say, well, you shouldn't work so hard or you shouldn't push so hard. But the reality is, there's really, my belief, like if you do want to get somewhere, like that's the code. Like everyone's looking for a cheat code. That's the code. Like, yes, there's smarter ways to do it. You can continually improve, invest in people, invest in better strategies, set up better systems. But at the end of the day, doing the work is going to get you where you're going to get to.
Yeah, and I know we're obviously not talking about sport, but like Michael Jordan wasn't Michael Jordan because he just did it on the days where he felt kind of good, and when people told him to take it easy and not be so obsessed, he's like, yeah, you're right, maybe I won't go train today. It's like it requires a level of work and effort that most people don't even think that they've got in them.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. Like, I know I think Hormozy talks about it a lot, but most people have no idea what their actual limit is in terms of the amount of work and effort they can put into anything in their whole entire life. Because as soon as they get close to it, it's like, I probably should pull back a little bit. I'm going to get burnt out or need more balance here and there. And that's exactly why some of these areas don't excel to the extent that they think they will, because you've never even gotten close to what your actual limit is. And it's not that we always want to be pushing to the absolute limit, of course not. But yeah, there's so much room for growth, or so much room for more effort in almost every single thing that everyone does.
100%.
The only reason that they haven't gotten there is because of this almost not make believe, but this worry of like being burnt out or being too obsessed or working too hard and not having enough balance. It's like, well, some of these things are things you need to sacrifice if you want this to do what you think it's going to do.
Yeah.
I think there's an element to this too, though. It's about utilizing the resources and tools that you have around you. So like there's working and then not wanting to burn out. So working really, really hard, not wanting to burn out. But you kind of look like a bit of a fool if you're working that hard and putting yourself at risk of burning out if you've got all these resources to help you.
Oh, yeah.
So like I'm sure you have staff and you have systems and you have certain principles you all work by. But there are a lot of people and that, might be doing what we're doing or in another business that they're the head honcho, but maybe there's a bit of a chip on their shoulder and they are so passionate and want to excel so much, but they could probably not tone it down, but enjoy more things in their life if they utilize the resources around them. Like, is that something, delegation, is that something that you struggled with at the start or have you found it easy?
No, I definitely struggle with it. Yeah. And it's still something I'm working on now. Like, yeah, that's been a big one. I probably found myself in the trap, which a lot of people do, of just being busy, or not being busy, but wearing that as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Of like, no one's working harder than me, or no one's doing more than me, or I'm going to do this in my business because that means that, this, that, the other. But the reality is that's just stupid a lot of the time, right? Like what it took me so long to understand is, yes, I might feel great about the fact that I just spent a week trying to build my website so I could say that I've done it. But someone could have done that in fucking half an hour. And I could have spent that week doing what I'm actually good at, or adding value towards what I need to add value towards. And so, yeah, I think delegation for sure. I still think early days you have to almost wear all the hats, and it's not forever, but it's just to the point where you have enough of an understanding so that when you are delegating, you know what you're doing, or you know what to expect in a sense. And the thing that helped me a lot with this was one of the coaches that I work with from a business perspective got me to figure out what an hour of my time was worth, or what I thought an hour of my time was worth. It doesn't even have to be real, right? Like getting to the point where you try and put a number, a value on an hour of your time. And from that point onwards, when you're in a position to do so, it's like, well, if I can get someone else to do this, and this is only for certain aspects, obviously, you still have to do the shit you're good at, but if I can get someone else to do this for less than what an hour of my time is worth, then I've saved myself money.
Yeah.
Like just a random example. Let's say you say an hour of your time is worth whatever, $500, right? Put a large number on it, $500, and you can go higher, lower, whatever. If I'm sitting here and there's something that I need to do, maybe it's editing for the podcast, but I know that what I'm good at is recording podcasts or coaching clients. If it costs $250 for someone to edit it for an hour, then I've just saved myself $250.
Yeah.
Because I would have spent that hour and probably another hour doing the same thing, which if I'm saying an hour of my time is $500, it's just cost me $1,000. So it's a weird way to think about it, but at the very least, it gets you starting to think a bit smarter.
Yeah.
Or it starts to prompt you to value your own time more. because then it starts to make a bit more sense. It's like, yeah, I've been really busy this week, but 30% of it was coaching or 30% of it was building my business. The 70% that was left over was spent doing all of this other shit that didn't really move the needle at all. It just filled in time because I didn't get anyone else to do it.
We sat down, how long ago? A couple of weeks ago?
Yeah.
And like, again, with like a business mentor that we're going to be working with, and that exact same principle. And then it's now about, I mean, it sounds bad. Again, like, I don't like some of these topics. Some people think are taboo, which I think is ridiculous. Like talking about money openly, some people think, oh, you shouldn't talk about it. I love it. But, and like the truth is, I'm trying to get in the mindset, if it's not making us money, like we're not doing it. Or if it's, you know what I mean? Like there's obviously, you can move it, you can move that needle a little bit for certain, you know, aspects of, you know, one-offs or there's always things where that may move. But for the most part, it has to translate into a financial dollar.
Yeah.
Otherwise, as a business, it's not sustainable.
What's the fucking point?
Yeah.
I think, you know, that was something that I've worked a lot on with another one of my mentors as well is the money side. Like I had a lot of blocks or limiting beliefs around money, particularly in business.
Yeah.
And, you know, the reality is we use money for absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Right. And most people have a goal of attracting or earning more money.
Yeah.
But then when you speak about it, it's something that it's almost like you shouldn't talk about
No.
it. Well, that's probably the exact reason as to why you've got such a big problem with it.
Yeah.
Or why there's so much resistance around it, right? At the end of the day, it's a utility, you know, and when there's a meaning or a purpose behind it, it is essential, right? And it's not, obviously, I'm not sitting here going like, oh, you know, everything's always about money. And if it's not about money, then it shouldn't happen. Like I'm the exact opposite of that. But reality is if I want to be able to have like the impact or do the things that I want to do, it requires money.
Exactly.
And so if I'm not prioritizing that, then it's stupid, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what do you, again, your expectation and reality is going to be very, very different. And so I think the more comfortable you can get with it as well, the better it's going to be for you, particularly if you do have a business or there is something that you're trying to do that requires money. You know, I think it's a conversation that more people should get comfortable with having.
What were some of those things or beliefs restricting you from getting to where you are now financially? Like what specific things?
There's been a few. I think the two key ones, particularly from the business sense, was I was just too nice. You know, right from the start of when I started putting out content, the framework or the approach was always just offer as much value as possible and you know, give away my best knowledge for free, which I still do to this day. But that kind of just went on didn't go on too long, but I was carrying that across to everything, right? So if it was like, oh, you know, you boys asked me to come on the podcast and then next week you reach out and ask if you can come in for some sessions, I'd be like, yeah, sweet, I'll just take you for a session. And that'd go on and on and on.
Yeah.
And so that's one very small example, but that was happening a lot throughout my whole business basically. And so there's a few things that come from that. One, it's not really a business. You know, it's kind of just a hobby in a sense because it's not being run like a business. Two, you end up becoming resentful, you know, as a business owner as well. It's like you become resentful towards whether it's clients or whether it's towards doing certain things. But when you look back at it, it's like you have to take full responsibility, right? An example would be, let me think of an example. Let's say I usually charge for something, but then someone reaches out and I'm just like, oh, I just want to be a good bloke, or I know this person, or they're a fucking friend of a cousin of a buddy, whatever. Yeah, I'll do it for free. My level of desire to do it has instantly already dropped, right? Because I know it's not really worth it for me. And so that's not their fault. That's mine. Like that's my responsibility. I could have just charged them, you know, and I know that's a random example, but that was kind of one that particularly when I started working with business coaches, they were just like, what the fuck are you doing? You know, like the amount of effort I was putting in for the amount of reward just was not a match. And it wasn't anyone's fault other than my own. And so it was starting to just look at things like that, and also just understanding money. Like this is probably a bigger conversation, but money is just energy, right? And it's an exchange of value always. And it's always this constant flow of energy. And so a lot of the coaching from the mindset perspective now as well, like is on this topic, you know, people having these money blocks, and it's beliefs that we've kind of adopted or taken on board from a lot of the time from when we grew up, like from family or friends or our environment or past experiences that have now created a belief that we kind of buy into. And as long as we believe these things, like a prime example would be, let's say someone really, really has always struggled with money in their life, right? Or never feel like they never had enough of it. They're always really struggling with it. If you ask them what their belief is around money, it's most likely going to be quite a negative or a poor belief. And I don't mean like financially poor, but just a negative belief. And they would say it's because they've never had money, but it's the exact opposite. The reason they've never had much money is because of that belief. And that belief probably wasn't even something that they decided. It was a belief that maybe their parents had, that they've now kind of just gravitated towards because that was their only experience with it. And so I think just starting to bring more awareness to like what you actually believe about money, right? If you believe it's hard to make, then it will be.
Yeah.
If you believe that you're never going to have much of it, then you won't. If you believe that every time you get it, it's all this shit turns up and you got all these bills and all these unexpected things, and that's exactly what's going to happen. And so when you have that belief, it's then going to lead to the thoughts that you have. And this is like this concept I run through with my clients called the belief loop. And this is obviously in this case about money, but it's with anything. Whatever belief you put your attention to, and majority of our beliefs aren't true either, right? And so that's kind of a good thing to understand, because you realize, well, if my belief's not true, then why have I experienced it time and time again? And the reason is you have the belief, which then usually leads to the thoughts that you have subconsciously. Those thoughts usually determine what actions you take. The actions lead to the result. Result now reaffirms the belief. And so if you're seeing this same result, it's just strengthening this belief that you've got. But if the belief is never true, then now it's just a matter of trying to shift what your attention towards a belief that does align with what you want, or it does align with the outcome that you want. And so, and I went on a bit of a tangent there, but
I love it.
That's come at some of the areas, like particularly with business. It was just like I felt my business and audience or level of growth in terms of skill set and all the rest of it has been going like this, or like this, for a long period of time. But my bank account didn't match that.
Yeah.
It was like, what is going on? There's something that's missing here. It's like the better things get with business, this wasn't getting any better. And so I just had to start looking at some of these beliefs and just aspects that I could improve that would start to change that.
Being too nice, that's really relatable, I feel. Even something, we've probably done similar things where you might undercharge a client here, and it's purely out of, because you genuinely love the person or like the person and want to provide it for him. But then you do resent it a little bit. Like you don't want to go, like literally, we've felt that feeling.
Everything you're talking about.
Big time.
Yeah.
And
I think from their side as well, though.
Yeah.
Like this has been floating around a bit on socials lately, but if we're friends and you launch a business or you're holding an event and it's a paid event or whatever, like I should want to come and pay full price to support you. Right? That's how it should be. And I know that I would do that, and so I would hope that my friends would want to do the same too. Whereas if you look at most of society, it's the opposite. It's like, oh, well, can I come in and just do it for free because I'm your friend, or like, what's a code? I can discount code, or blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of the opposite of what it should be, in a sense, right? It's like, that's just the way that I look at it. And I obviously said being too nice, and I think everyone should be a fucking good person and be nice and all the rest of it. And there's obviously a time and place to do things just because you want to be a good person, all the rest of it. But when it starts to become the way that you approach everything, you can't, because when you're in that position, the first thing you do is look externally.
Yeah.
You want to put the blame or look at all the reasons as to why it's happening, and you never really just look back at yourself and go, well, I can trace all of this reason back to the way that I'm approaching all of this. And so I think it's and as well, it's just a projection. This is probably I won't keep going on about this too long, but if you've got these beliefs around money, then this is now what you think everyone else feels.
That's right.
And so when I started to do a lot more sales in my business, particularly for coaching, and as I got over my beliefs and started charging what I knew I was actually worth, I was really awkward about telling people the price. I would get fucking uncomfortable to say the price of it. But that was just me projecting my belief on money onto them. If I'm on and this is not going to be the case all the time, but if I'm on a sales call with someone and they're a billionaire and I'm telling them what my price is, they fucking wouldn't even blink.
That's right.
Like, no worries. But I'm sitting here worried to tell them how much it is because I think it's too much.
It's so true.
It's like it's a complete misalignment.
We've literally, everything you've said, pretty much this whole episode, we've felt at some stage. And
it's amazing.
And the first time you actually get paid what you're actually worth, and like although it's scary to put the proposal forward, but the second they tick it off, then you go back to everything. Like you look back at the previous 3 to 5 or 10 deals you did, and you're like, fuck, like that's where it could have been.
I think for you guys as well, just quickly, like a bit of the work that I do with my clients, whether it be money or anything else, is you want to start to decide like, okay, what is the outcome or the experience that we want, like that you boys want, right? And what feels good and what would make you feel like it's where it should be, right? And let's say it's from a money perspective, like that in a sense almost needs to become your normal, your expectation, right? And this is where you can't waver from that.
Yeah.
And so when you're on a call with someone, and this is the change or the growth that I've had with this side of things, is that if I'm in a call with someone and it gets to the point where whether it's a sponsor or a client or whatever, and it's time to talk about the price, it's like, say it with confidence. You know you're worth that.
Yeah.
Why are you questioning your own worth, or why are you questioning your own value? It's like, this is what it is. And we want to get to that point where even if they say yes, or when they say yes, it shouldn't be a surprise, right?
Yeah.
If you feel like it's a surprise, then this is probably a conversation, again, that can go for so long, but I talk a lot around the law of vibration and frequency.
Yeah.
Right? When people win the jackpot in Tats Lotto, there's a huge percentage of them that after a year or two have lost all the money.
Yeah.
And it's because nothing about them, from a habit, maybe even work ethic and personality, but frequency standpoint, is a match for that money.
That's right.
And so we always revert to what's normal, right? To what feels normal for us. And so the goal is to try and create the new normal, to the point where it's almost an expectation. And so 2 years ago, if a client emails me or someone emails me and goes, hey, I want to pay you 50 grand to work with you for 6 months, I would have fucking fallen off this chair. And I would have went and told anyone I could fucking see for the rest of the day and be like, can you believe this shit? Like this, sorry if you can't swear.
No, absolutely.
Editors is going to have a tough time.
You can. Yeah.
But I would have been so shocked at it. And that's just a perfect sign. And a lot of the mindset stuff talk a lot about, universal laws and stuff like that. That's a perfect sign, me basically saying to the universe that this is not normal. And I'm not ready for it. Because if it was normal, right, if you offer me a glass of water, I'm not going to sit here and go, fucking hell, how good is this? Like, these guys just gave me a glass of water. It's normal. It's an expectation in a sense.
Yeah.
And so until it gets to that point where it's just like, it doesn't really, you're obviously grateful and happy about it, but it doesn't really affect your frequency at all. It doesn't make it go up, doesn't make it go down. Now you're in business because that's normal. And so again, the way to get to that point is almost like embodying the version of yourself that's already there, right? Because otherwise, why would it end up here if this is just something that you're looking up to? It's like, if this is normal for me, and this is where you can't waver from your standards either. Like if you got a sponsor and you really want them and they're like, nah, that's just way too expensive. It's like, no worries. Like, thanks for your time.
That's
like, yep, because putting so much of an importance on that is you kind of just saying that, well, we need this, right? We need this, and without this, like, there's not going to be anything else that comes. It's a very kind of lack and scarcity way to think about it. Whereas if you know that there's just like an abundant amount of these opportunities because that's what level you're on, then whether they say yes or no, it shouldn't really affect you at all.
That's right. And that's what you try and aim to, but I think that's something I've personally struggled with too. It's like,
sometimes you just need to grab your testicles.
yeah,
and
that's been our,
just say, fucking ask for it. You know,
our motto this year is grab your balls. Like, so
nice.
It's eternally. We even told these boys this. It's like literally grab your, like, because we've pussied out so many times. Like, so something we really good at is we'll go into a meeting and we'll rev each other up half an hour. We're going to say this, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then it just, I'm waiting for him to say it. He's waiting for me to say it. And then neither of us walk out and we go, fuck. Like, now we've got to email what we actually went there for, which was just wasted everyone's time, which now we literally say, grab your balls and ask what we're here for. But something we found too, and we've said this, I don't know if we've said on our pod, we've said on when we've been interviewed on other people's, but it's amazing how many times, and I hate the word found money. I don't, when people say, I need to find money, that to me, that's, finding it implies it's luck, right? But it's funny how many times we've made money when we, like, almost at that last strip of needing it. Like, we've been able to do it.
you find a way to get it.
Which says to, like, it says basically on the point you're talking earlier, like it says it's not puts you in that mindset. It's actually not difficult to make money versus when you're like, oh fuck, it's so hard.
There's an exercise that obviously anyone that's listening or watching can do, but you guys will find really helpful that I do with my clients. So if I'm sitting here and I'm just like, oh, I'd love $1 million, right? Like that's great, but there's no emotion attached to it. I talk about this concept around the metaphysical, right? Every single thing in this room or everything everywhere was once a thought, and there was an emotion attached to it, and then the physical thing shows up. Right? It's never the opposite. Like these glasses just didn't show up, and then someone goes, "Fuck, you know what? It'd be really cool to make a pair of glasses that look like that. How good would that be?" And then like, "Oh shit, they're already here." The thought emotion comes first, physical comes second, and it's the same with money. And so what we're trying to do, and the point of this exercise is to create a meaning for the money.
Yeah.
Right? If I'm saying I want $1 million and there's no meaning to it, it means that there's nothing attached to that whatsoever. But if I've sat down and I've gone, okay, I really want to do this over the next few years. How am I going to do that? Or how much money would I need to do that? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, that equates to about $1 million that I would need if I was going to do that. Now all of a sudden there's a meaning to it. And so what you said before, sometimes money just kind of presents itself when you need it the most, and it just kind of happens.
Yeah.
Right? Because there was a meaning for it. So if I ask you this question before I tell you this exercise, hijacking this podcast, sorry.
No, we love it. We love it.
Has there ever been a point in time in your life, and I don't mean like you could just go and buy anything and everything you possibly could think of just randomly, but has there ever been a point in time where money was not there to support you when you needed it? And I mean like, okay, whether it be for rent, whether it be for whatever, just stuff that you actually need. And the second part of this is that the money doesn't even have to be yours, right? Has there ever been a point in time for either of you where money wasn't there to support you?
No.
And so when you start to think about it, it's like, all right, well, if it was never missing when I needed it, why don't I just start to decide what I fucking need it for?
Yeah.
Right? And as an example the other day with a client, she was like, no, there was a period of time where I didn't have it and I had to borrow it from my family. And I said, so it was there. It wasn't yours, but it still found its way to you somehow. And so this exercise, there's a bit of detail to it, but you kind of go through and you map out every single expense that you have per month, every single one of them. But in this category, you're also going to put the expenses, and the expenses don't have to just be shit that you need for business or to live. It could just be like, oh, I like playing 18 holes of golf every weekend. Like just something that would make me feel fulfilled and happy. So you would include that price into this. So you're putting in every expense that you would have if everything was the way that you want it to be right now, or the way that you're trying to build towards. And so if it means, you've got 10 staff for the podcast. Yeah. That would go into these needs. There's a needs column and a wants, right? Go through, and by the time you put all these in, you are going to have a very specific number. And so I remember 12 months ago when I did this, I put in a car payment for a car that I didn't have yet. And I had a number of other things, like an amount of rent for where I'd like to be living, all of these type of things that just weren't a thing yet, and a lot of them were. And at the end of it, you're left with this number, and if you're doing it properly, the number probably should scare the fuck out of you a little bit. Yeah. Because you're like, how is that going to happen? And the trick here is you don't need to figure out how yet, right? And there's this little analogy I'll give you guys soon, but this is actually what I recorded the podcast on this morning. But that number is now very clear, right? If you think about any other form of like manifestation or law of attraction or whatever, or even Facebook ads, you go into Google and you type in, I want this pair of Nike shoes. The color and the size and everything, and you go on Instagram or Facebook, and now you're seeing all these ads for this exact pair of shoes. You got really specific about what you wanted, and now you're aware of it more often. And the likelihood of you buying them, whether it's from that ad or whether you just see them again in a month and you're like, shit, I'll just get them today, is pretty high. So when you got this number, now the main purpose of that exercise is there is a meaning and a reason for that money, right? So again, the number probably would look like a number that you're trying to think like that's fucking, I don't know how that's going to happen. Yeah. And it will happen because now there's an actual meaning for the amount that you're saying that you need, the amount that you want or that you're desiring. Does that make sense?
Could I ask a question then? Because I love this, right? I love this whole concept. And I want to play devil's advocate for a second. Yep. So for us, right, we're in a fortunate position where we don't really have a limit on what we can actually earn, which excites the living shit out of me.
Yeah,
right?
It should.
That's what I love about business. Is it's like there's no ceiling, there's no cap. we can keep growing and delivering, all that sort of stuff. But for the person listening that works a 9 to 5, has no side hustles, no interest, what does this exercise do for them, which might be a big portion of the audience, or is it about framing other areas of their life?
Well, I think it makes total sense, right? Because again, the whole premise of this exercise is, what do you need?
Okay.
Right? What do you need? Not necessarily just what do you, and it can be obviously the desire or the want, but it's more so like this becomes like the baseline. And so if someone's got like a 9 to 5, they're on a set salary, right? And they put down all of their expenses for the month, or all the things, the amount of money that they need in order for them to just have that life that they want. Then if they're now starting to write down all these other things that kind of don't really match what they actually need, right? They just kind of just wants, right? That's also okay. But what it then leads to is that person starting to go, okay, well, I don't have to know how it's going to happen, but if I know that I'm in this job, and mind you, it's not always the obvious shit, right? That person all of a sudden might get a really fucking big tax return, or they might get a job, a pay rise, or a promotion at work, or something along those lines. But it also might go, okay, well, maybe I'm just going to start this side hustle.
Yeah.
Maybe I go and actually put my, spare 2-3 hours every night that I usually just sit around and do fuck all. Like, maybe I'm going to start and learn about investing, or maybe I'm going to start doing this, that, and the other. And I think this is the whole point, is that you get specific about just a clear intention. And as I said before, now that that's the intention, all of these thoughts and the actions you start taking are going to start to be more in alignment with that. Instead of just, just hoping for the best and always being pissed off that things don't look the way you want. But it's like, what did you do? Did you take any action towards it? I think what tends to happen with this, and majority of my clients, not majority, but a lot of them aren't business owners. A lot of them are in jobs, like 9 to 5 jobs, which is fantastic. And they've done this same exercise. And almost every single one of them has gotten 6 to 12 months in and gone, okay, I've got to do this again.
Yep.
Because it's changed. Now, again, I'm not saying that money has to come from just you working either, right? Maybe you've written this down and you've got a husband or a wife, and all of a sudden they get the pay rise. And it's like, shit, now this starts to make a bit of sense here as well. And so I think the main point of like that exercise is the meaning part of it, right? There has to be an actual purpose behind your desire or what you want, or the intention that you're setting, particularly within business. Because anyone can sit here and just be like, oh, I'd love this much money. It's like, well, money is, coming back to what I started with, money is a resource, and it's a utility. That's what it is.
Yep.
It's an exchange of value, and it's a utility.
Love it.
And so it's like, what do you need to utilize it for? I don't know. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense.
Yeah, that was really good.
I mean, again, and I look back at what I love, again, and I'm trying to make this hopefully relatable to a lot of people too. So when I keep referring back to us, as in our business, I hope it still relates somewhat to the person watching or listening. But again, what I love about what we're doing is there's no blueprint. So it's not like we've gone and got a certain degree and there's a linear path. Like some people find that really scary, because there's no clear pathway. Of
uncertainty.
But for me, it's like you can create. There's so much opportunity. It's a blank canvas. So your story, when you go back to 2015, for example, 2016 when you started the podcast, but the online business, and probably not too many clear blueprints or a map to follow. If you now look 10 years down the line, what was your vision back then compared to how it turned out now, or where you're at currently?
I would say in a sense it was similar, but I've always tried to just almost reflect like my experience or where I'm at through my businesses and through my content to an extent. And so obviously when you look at online coaching, face-to-face coaching, I used to do a lot more with athletes back then than what I do now in terms of the face-to-face stuff. Still do a bit, but more so over the off season. Look at those things, podcast, online coaching, they were all kind of things that I'd already planted the seed and started doing. It's just this evolution of what that looks like in a sense. And so even the mindset stuff, like that's purely been because I've just become very passionate about it, because I did a lot of that work, and I saw the effect it had on my life. And so it was, same as the content I put out. It's never like, hey, this is how you do this, or this is the only way to do this. This is right and this is wrong. It's like, hey, I wanted to do this. Here's what I did. Here's what I found. do what you want with it. Take it and use it if you want, or this is my experience. And so the vision was always just to try and, in some way or another, wasn't super clear of how it had to look. It was just to have as much impact on people as it possibly could, in terms of, obviously it started predominantly just health and fitness. And now it's just, particularly since the mindset stuff, it almost unlocked a new door of like, shit, this impact can be even bigger now, instead of just training and nutrition. Like, I've seen how it's impacted my life. Like, imagine if more people knew this. Imagine if more people could start thinking like this. Imagine if more people could change their limiting beliefs, or, you know, understand all of these different frameworks that I had started to see firsthand. It was just a matter of trying to almost reflect that through my content and through my businesses, so more people could benefit from it. And so it's all just been an extension, in a sense, of me, which sounds egotistical. It's not meant to, but the supplement business, the podcast, the mindset stuff, this is all literally just a byproduct of the shit that I've done and that I've found value from. And I've just gone, okay, well, let me just start sharing more of this.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I even became a trainer in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, never had been to the gym, loved running and I was obviously basketball and football, and then went to the gym, hated it, and then quickly fell in love with it. And that became this thing that not only like allowed me to change my physique, but it changed me as a person. You know, I was always, like we kind of touched on, like always very much a people pleaser, worried about everyone's opinion all the time, not a great deal of self-belief or self-esteem. And like the gym was finally something where I was like, the more work I put in, the more I'm rewarded for it.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm responsible for whether things change or whether they don't. And particularly coming from a team sport background, like with basketball in particular, like I'd had that work ethic and not seen the reward in a number of areas. Like, I'm sure we might touch on it today, but like a number of areas I'd had the work ethic, and a lot of stuff was outside of my control. Whereas now it's like, shit, the harder I work, the more I benefit from this.
Yeah.
And so that obviously leads to more confidence and stuff outside of the physical changes as well. And so I was like, I want to help other people with this. You know, I want more people to experience this. And then vice versa. Everything else kind of just continued to flow. And as you said before, the uncertainty thing is a good thing.
Definitely.
Right? Like there cannot be change without uncertainty, or without an unfamiliar feeling, or without resistance. And so like if something is familiar and you're certain about it, what's the likelihood of it being any different?
Yeah.
There is none.
Yeah.
Right. And so the first thing that majority of people do with uncertainty is try and revert to comfort.
Yes.
Or is try and revert to clarity on certainty. And so it's like, well, if that feels comfortable and if that feels certain, then you've already experienced it. And you're most likely doing this to experience something different.
That's right.
And so you have to get to that point where you can embrace the uncertainty.
Yeah.
Like it is a good thing. It creates room for something new to be experienced, or for something new to fall into place. And if we're always reverting to comfort, or always filling those uncertain gaps with something because like shit can't handle the fact that it's a bit uncomfortable, then there's no room for anything new to go.
I feel like uncertainty, loneliness surrounds it too. So I don't know, Bryce will know this, being, and you too probably being a Chris Williamson, like I love his podcast. He talks about the lonely chapter. And the lonely chapter is when you've grown away from your friends that you might have grown, you've grown up enough to kind of look at your old friends and go, oh, I want something more. I want to move away from my hometown. You're from Horsham, so you're kind of going, I want to get out of Horsham, but you've got all your friends still in Horsham. So you move into Melbourne. You don't have any friends yet, so you're grinding and you're doing exactly what you're doing, but nothing's guaranteed and there's all this uncertainty, but you're feeling lonely because I haven't quite met my new group of friends who have achieved what I want to achieve.
Yep.
And it's something that we have talked about a lot. We've only probably just got out of that lonely phase in the last 12 months, which, we're still somewhat there, but there was a strong period of time where you're just grinding your ass off and you're not quite mixing with the circles that you will be mixing with, and people who will understand what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Was there a specific point in time where you felt like you'd got out of that lonely chapter?
It's a really good question.
Or are you still in it? I feel like we're still in it to an extent. Like,
I think particularly if you've got that ambition to keep growing or to keep doing bigger and better things, there's always that extent, to an extent, there's always that there, I think. Right. But there's probably two other aspects to it. For me personally, it was almost the reverse order. Like I went from almost constantly wanting and seeking to be part of this thing to then the exact opposite of going like, fuck, I'm now kind of embracing, obviously not being lonely, very fortunate and, particularly at the moment, very fortunate to have a beautiful fiance and great friends and all the rest of it. But it was like, if I'm consistently just seeking to be part of this thing, then I can't really carve my own path, right? Or I'm not going to experience anything much different in a sense. And so the two aspects of it is one, the law of exposure. And obviously, you can think about that in many ways, but exposing yourself to something that's at the level of where you want to be or that is not normal for you yet, right? And so I was really lucky when I got here, like in terms of, and I'm not even going to say it was luck because it wasn't luck. It was, I created my own luck, but I was instantly kind of working with athletes that I'd been fucking admiring on TV as a fucking junior athlete for my whole life. I was working with them. A lot of my PT clientele were like big business people. And so it was all of these things. And even moving to Melbourne, like I was being exposed to this way of living and all these different ideas and beliefs that like I'd never really been exposed to before and that weren't normal for me. And so the more I kept surrounding myself with stuff like that, the more it started to feel normal.
Yeah.
And not that I'd started, experiencing it myself yet, but it was like, I can keep, like the more I did this, I noticed a trend. It was like the more I get out of my comfort zone and put myself in an environment that is not normal, where like I'm almost having to adapt and learn really quickly, then the more things start to follow, right? And so the more my life started to gradually build as well. And so, in business, there's two sides. Yes, there's always like a bit of that lonely feeling.
Yeah.
There is always going to be to an extent. But then it also makes you realize that it's really, really important to have, and it doesn't need to be a shitload of people. It can just be a really small circle of people that you can really lean on and have to support each other and to bounce ideas off and whatnot. But with the uncertainty piece, like, if this is like your life and you're trying to experience this, right? And you're like, oh, I want something new. And so now there's this big gap. There's this big clear space of nothingness, right? The uncertainty. And every time it feels a bit uncomfortable, you're like, oh shit, I'm going to quickly put this here because it looks a bit uncomfortable to be so empty. Well, then you're kind of just consistently blocking that ability to experience something new to an extent. And so I don't know if that even really answered the question, but
no, it was good.
No, what makes, I mean, like for me too, it's also, there's the loneliness factor, but it's also the validation factor where you're chasing, you're doing something that's so different that everybody else probably isn't. And you need validation or reward or proof that
that's exactly right.
It's kind of working.
Someone's angle grinding a house down outside.
I know, that's really quite annoying. Hopefully the mics don't pick them up. So we hopefully be like, do you want to jump into 2 Edge?
Yeah, let's do 2 Edge.
So Sammy, can you bring over the 2 Edge and maybe bring over the hat, and we'll see if Danny would be game to chuck on a hat just for a segment with 2 Edge. But
sure.
Mate, we spoke to you obviously during the week and said that we got this segment which is show and tell, which we like to bring to the audience, which is just to bring in something that's just it's special to you, and it can be meaningful. It may just be funny. It could be anything that we'd love to hear about. But this is brought to you by 2 Edge. Now, you play golf, Danny?
I do.
You do.
Well,
beautiful.
Yeah. I attempt to play golf. Thank you.
You attempt to play golf. Well,
I do attempt to play golf. 2
Edge is going to look after you after this segment. But mate, next to you is the 2 Edge 725 series. Now these guys are based out in Dandenong, and they actually build the clubs on site, don't they?
They
manufacture.
Yeah, everything's there.
Everything's there. Big focus on precision, accuracy, and distance. So these guys will sort
2 Edge AU on Instagram as well. Plenty of good stuff.
You can win
competitions.
Stuff. You can win stuff. You can win. You might win the hat that Danny's wearing, or
the gloves,
or there's heaps. So just 2 Edge AU guys, make sure you go follow them, and of course check them out online if you do want to. If you're in the market for some new clubs, because they'll look after you. Now, do you want to introduce
Danny?
How do you boys go at golf quickly?
Shocking.
We're playing in a couple of weeks, and I haven't played in a long time.
That's usually probably a good thing. That's what I've found.
Well, I'm keen to get back into it. So, mate, you're
You
down.
played
Mate.
recently.
I played recently. Well, it was surprisingly better than I thought. It wasn't great, but better than I thought. So, mate, maybe we'll go over hit in a few weeks.
We'll have to have a hit, yeah.
Yeah. But, mate, we'd love to know what you brought in for this segment.
What I brought in, I'll have to get it.
Actually,
Sammy, you got it?
Sammy will help you
Oh,
out.
sweet. Wasn't that creative.
Mate, it doesn't need to be creative.
Oh,
Here we
Yeah,
go.
Scott Penderbury basketball background.
Yeah, I brought in the basketball today, boys.
Lovely.
Looked like, I was saying as it came in, looked like a bloody Harlem Globetrotter walking down Clarendon Street with a basketball in the middle of the day.
So, mate, so is this a special basketball to you, or is it just more what it represents?
It's more so what it represents, to be honest. And you know, for anyone who's kind of heard any of my podcasts or a bit of my story, probably understand. Like, the reason I brought this in, I had a pretty, I wouldn't say I had a tough time, but I had a tough time trying to figure out what I was going to bring in and why. And so luckily I fucking found this.
I mean, you've probably got an engagement ring on too,
Nah.
Oh, I thought you said you're engaged.
Yeah, but the blokes don't wear an engagement ring, do they?
Well, my girlfriend's listening to this going, yeah.
Great.
When are you going to pop the question?
She's like, shit, I better take his ring back. Yeah.
That's embarrassing.
Anyway, I love that. That was fantastic.
God.
Love that for you. So, yeah, brought in the ball. And the reason I brought it in, as I said, I've talked about this a lot on the show, but growing up, I obviously played basketball. That was basically my whole life up until about 21. But it's not just the fact that I was playing. It's probably more so like the lessons or like the foundation that it built for what I do now, I guess you could say. And so I know this is probably not that exciting of a segment or much of a funny one, but basketball, I was very fortunate to play like at a high level and do some really, really cool stuff with basketball. But at the same time, it's what basically taught me how to deal with failure and setbacks in the most, what can you say it? How can you say it? Sorry. In like to the fullest extent, pretty much. Like growing up, I grew up in Horsham, obviously, and we have some incredible basketballers, and we did, particularly when I was playing as well. And so I was very, very lucky to grow up playing with a lot of those boys that now have gone on to do fucking incredible things. And so throughout all of my juniors, like my only ambition was to play basketball. And like the thing that meant more to me than anything else was I was placing this massive importance and a lot of my identity and worth on making certain teams or reaching a certain level of success with basketball. And it was almost like the carrot was being dangled in front of me for about 9 years. And it was always like, just as I'd feel like I'd close to it, it'd be ripped away. And so for me, that kind of looked like just consistently getting really, really close to making certain teams and getting cut. And I think probably what amplified it was the fact that pretty much everyone else I was growing up with was making the teams as well. Yeah. And so again, it was probably not just a basketball issue. It was probably more so just I just didn't have a great deal of self-worth, and I was probably seeking that validation from achievements, which was always falling short on. And so I just went through a shitload of failure and setbacks from about the age of 14 all the way through till 21. And obviously in the moment it was shit, right?
Yeah,
it was like completely demoralizing. And I basically had everyone around me pretty much questioning why I was still doing it. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I kind of just did the exact opposite. And I look back now at my time through business and many other kind of challenges and stuff that I've been through since I finished basketball, and I genuinely put a lot of gratitude on that period of time of consistently being having these setbacks and failures, right? And as I said, I don't know why it was, but instead of just quitting, which would have been the easiest and probably most obvious choice at the time, it just really instilled in me the importance of hard work. And I kind of took that on board very early and just thought, well, I'm not going to be the most skilled. I never will be. But the thing that's in my control is how hard I can work and the amount of effort I put in. And so I took that approach to basketball. And even still, like I was very fortunate to keep, seeing great success, but not the success that I wanted. Yeah. And so when the time eventually came, I had an ankle reco in 2013. after I'd been here for 2 years for basketball full time. And that was basically the end. Like I decided like after this, I'm not going to go back. And that was largely due to just some complications with the surgery itself. But it was by far the best thing that's ever happened for me. You know, at the time, was fucking severely depressed. Like had no idea what I basically tied my whole identity around being a basketballer. And so when it got taken away from me, I had no idea what was next. But again, as tough as that was, it was the best thing that ever happened for me, because without that, or in particular without that surgery, like we probably wouldn't be sitting here.
Yeah.
You know, 100%. Because I don't know what approach I would have taken. I probably would have continued to try and reach that level with basketball, which once I eventually stepped away, I realized it was never, particularly the last few years, I wasn't really that in love with it. It just became like this driving factor of wanting to prove kind of everyone else wrong and myself right. And as I said, I tied my identity to it and didn't really even allow myself to enjoy the other things that I probably felt more aligned with doing. And so once I finally kind of, you know, let go of that, that's when, you know, I guess you could say life truly began, I guess you could say. And so
sliding doors.
Yeah, exactly right. And so there's been many moments like that. And the reason why I brought this, obviously that story, but I think when I look back now at all of the worst things, without a doubt, in hindsight, they've been the best things that have ever happened for me, not to me. And so I think most people would be able to relate to that to some extent. And for me, it was basketball. I'm sure for others, it's many different things. But yeah, that's why I brought it.
Thank you,
mate.
That was good.
Love it.
Sammy, you want to come
Pleasure.
and grab that? And then as we probably finish up, Danny, we've got a little goodie bag for you as well, which Sammy will bring in a second.
Beautiful.
Do you have any last kind of questions before we? I mean, this is a great
I
podcast.
I just want to chat to Danny all day, because I feel like he's really speaking to us, you know, which I hope. I mean, there's just
sorry to everyone else listening.
Sorry to everybody. We've just had a bitch session for now. But mate, no, we will bring in the goodie bag. So firstly, we got the Milkman presented to you. Now, Milkman is all things male grooming. MilkmanAustralia.com, and he's linked you up today. Now, I think is he provided a brand new razor?
Oh,
razor.
Brand new razor.
That's nice.
And there should be some natural deodorant in there for you as well.
Perfect.
So,
Chuck some of that on after this.
Yeah, have a smell, mate. It'll keep you nice and fresh. MilkmanAustralia.com. Use the code dos&d for 20% off for all your male grooming needs.
And then Sammy's got the dos&d goodie bag, which in there is, bring that in. We've got plenty of little
How does that
goodies
smell
for you.
firstly? Does it smell all right?
Smells good.
Smells
Smells great.
Beautiful.
Smells better than me.
Well, mate, the hat on your head is from Tura Edge, and inside there they've got there's a golf glove for you as well.
Beautiful.
Healthy male. There's a nice little cookie in there which might go against.
At least I'll look the part.
Yeah,
that's it, mate. So there's a few golf
Fantastic.
accessories in there. There should be a drink bottle in there as well. A few bits
Thank
and
you very
pieces
much.
from our
No
wonderful
worries.
partners
Appreciate
that everybody would have heard from throughout this episode. But mate, you know, you've given us so much unbelievable wisdom today. I'm sure a lot of the listeners would take stuff away. But again, if people do want to work with you, how do we find you?
I'd probably just say the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast or Instagram is probably the two where you'll find all the rest of the stuff as well. But appreciate you boys having me on. Really enjoyed the chat. It's been awesome. Looking forward to staying connected and would love to obviously have you boys on my show sometime very soon.
Oh, mate, that'd be amazing. But yeah, no, I'll tell you what, I'd love to go get a feed one night and really expand this conversation. Talk business. But yeah, thank you so much, Danny. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you guys. And thanks to these guys as well, Milkman and
everyone else.
There's a few in there, mate.
Yeah,
don't stress too much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Danny.